Before he was Ambassador on Sustainable Development. Currently, he's Director Inclusive Green Growth. Welcome, René, for being with us. And I would like to give you the floor to give us an introduction on the principles of multi-stakeholder action to make the metal sector more sustainable and support a just transition from a government perspective. René, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, and welcome, dear participants, and also glad to see some familiar faces in the list of attendees. Great that we're all joining worldwide this OECD partner session today. It's for many reasons that I'd like to welcome CNV's International's involvement in this event, not in the least as I was a member myself of a trade union ever since I started working. Today, we reflect on the need, firstly, the need for a just transition, secondly, responsible business conduct as an enabler, and thirdly, perhaps most importantly, the need to work together, all of us, to make this happen. We all have a role to play. In the recent IPCC report launched earlier this month, scientists say it's now or never to limit global warming. The window of opportunity is to ensure a livable future for all is rapidly closing. The importance to act now is clear. So with the global energy transition and its exponential rise in demand for alternative energy sources, coal mines are being shut down globally and value chains are shifting to the mining of metals and critical materials and minerals. Production of graphite, lithium, and cobalt, they will, in this context of this transition that we're seeking, to be significantly ramped up by more than 450% by 2050 compared to 2018 levels to meet demand from energy storage technologies. Upscaling of critical raw material sites and opening new mines are of course time-consuming and capital-intensive processes. Opening a new mine takes around 10 to 12 years due to exploration and permits processes and construction works. So as a result, it's a big challenge to produce sufficient amounts of critical raw materials needed for technologies that support energy transition and climate policy goals. And this increase in demand and shift away from fossil-based systems and towards certain critical materials drastically changes the landscape of sourcing countries and overall can have negative consequences on national income, livelihoods, and the environment if we do not manage this properly. We all agree, or I hope we all agree, that the energy transition is crucial, but what does it mean for the people and communities that rely on fossil-based systems of energy production and consumption, or for the environment in countries rich in critical materials? We strongly believe that if we want to meet the challenge of decarbonizing our economies in a sustainable manner, we need to work on a just transition. We need to ensure that the process towards an environmentally sustainable economy is well managed and contributes to the goals of social inclusion and the eradication of poverty. And we also recognize that the transition is not just the replacement of one industry with another, but hopefully also a diversification towards a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive society overall. That's not going to be easy because it really calls for us to recognize our role in working that no one is left behind in a transition and that all countries in the end must benefit from the opportunities offered by sustainable and just transitions and by this new economy that societies that we're working on. So stakeholders need to adopt a careful approach to their due diligence practices, especially I would say also in regard to the local communities and mine workers at the beginning of the value chain. These are people, these are the ones who are often overlooked in energy transition plans. You may have heard of the Just Transition Declaration. It's a declaration that was signed by 14 countries, the Netherlands included, during the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow last November. And what is nice about this declaration is that it has some very practical principles. One of the principles focuses on supply chains. So what does it say? It says that the transition impacts businesses in supply chains and the health, environmental, and broader social and economic interest of those economically reliant on those supply chains. The signatories, and that's important, aim to ensure that existing supply chains and the new supply chains required for the energy transition, create decent work for all, including for the most marginalized, and create equitable employment across borders. Working on these principles, we, the Netherlands government, urge our businesses to ensure that supply chains are free of environmental and human rights abuses. And of course, we do that on the basis of the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, and of course, also the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And I'd like to say that, and I also worked on those issues for a long time, that ever since the adoption of the OECD guidelines and the UNGPs, significant steps have been taken to foster business respect for people and planet in their value chain. My country has tried and worked consistently to be at the forefront of these developments. And we were also one of the first countries in the world to adopt a national action plan on business and human rights and an ambitious policy on responsible business conduct. At the same time, I also realized when I say that we also have a responsibility, because our footprint worldwide is not only green and social. Having said that, more needs to be done to advance a just transition and make responsible business conduct the norm. We started to implement in the Netherlands a mix of hopefully mutually reinforcing measures to promote RBC. And in it varies from imposing due diligence legislation to stimulating RBC through support measures, financial incentives, and of course, conditional public support. What we do this afternoon is really important. We focus on an interesting example of a multi-stakeholder approach, the International RBC Agreement for the metal sector. Netherlands companies in the metal sector often rely, or let's say, I can also say in general, our companies in the metal sector often rely on the import of raw materials for their production. And the sector in itself, of course, runs an increased risk, I would say, of being witness or indirectly or directly violating human rights, labor rights, and environmental and biodiversity standards, and of having, of course, an impact on local communities. On a positive note, that I also like to stress, the mining sector can also, of course, be an important source of livelihood and employment. So what do the Dutch sector agreements do? They try to promote international RBC by creating partnerships between businesses, trade associations, government, unions, and NGOs. So this multi-stakeholder collaboration aims at identifying and preventing preventing abuses of human rights and environmental standards in supply chains. The agreements are concluded sector by sector, because we don't only have them in the metal sector. And we really try to have a long-term strategies to tackle complex problems and issues together. Two goals. Of course, to improve circumstances in a number of risk areas like child labor, low wages, human rights violations, and environmental pollution, and really try to have concrete results within a period of 3 to 5 years after the agreement was signed in 2019, and to offer a collective solution to problems that businesses are unable to solve on their own. So the Dutch metal sector also works with, of course, with recycled metal, and using responsibly recycled scraps helps to reduce the demand for primary raw materials and contributes also to a circular economy. So really aiming a lot of positive things, hopefully, with the thing, and not only aiming, but also achieving on those things. We see the agreement as an instrument for companies and other stakeholders, ourselves, to improve the collective performance. And as a result, from the cooperation between parties, we see results. And later on this afternoon, we will also discuss the projects in South America that will be discussed later on. What I think what the agreement also has done is that it has helped the metal sector to comply with the so-called EU conflict minerals regulation that entered into force in 2021. And you're aware probably that this regulation obliges importers of 4 specific metals to investigate the source of their raw materials. And compliance with these international guidelines probably, hopefully, of course, supports also the progress towards the SDGs. Going back to the Just Transition Declaration, I think it clearly recognizes the need to ensure that no one is left behind in the transition to net zero economies, particularly those working in sectors, cities, and regions reliant on carbon-intensive industries and production. So today, We are proud to present learnings from this multi-stakeholder initiative in the metal sector in support of a just transition. So thank you for your attention. I know that I will get a question, so I now wrap up so that there's time for this question that I will get. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you, René, for your presentation. And indeed, you mentioned a lot of things that need to be done by many parties in a holistic way to reduce the risk and to work towards the energy transition by reducing the amount that we use and reuse, how we should do it. I would like to ask you specifically, can you name something what governments, not just a Dutch government, what governments should specifically do to make sure that the energy transition in Europe leads towards a just transition in the carbon and metals international supply chain?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think first and foremost, we should make sure that we don't become hostage of politicians. And of course, politician Trump is a great example in this context, because with his someone is asking the floor.
Excuse me?
All right, I will continue.
Oh yeah, just finish your sentence.
I think we should be really careful that we will not be hostage of politicians who, with fake news and let's say non-existing promises, like politician Trump did, undermine the transition that we're looking for. And so we should really, and we should also be honest about the transitions, and we should also recognize that it affects the livelihood of people. And what can we do? So what we can do is to support workers in the transition to new jobs and really promote green and inclusive jobs. How do you do that? Well, of course, by supporting skill development and favorable labor policies. So that is important. Skills, education, capabilities, capacities. It's also very important to have an honest social dialogue and to have social stakeholder engagement. And moreover, I think that we should also support countries in creating and enabling environments and frameworks, and really come up with long-term economic strategies to ensure this sustainable, durable, and inclusive economic recovery and growth.
Okay, so being long-term and communicate transparently, maybe that will help.
But okay. I think I spoke in a very theoretical and a technical way, perhaps a little bit, but I really like to warn that what is the biggest risk is that all our good intentions are derailed by politicians.
Okay,
with fake news.
I've taken your point. We take it off to the panelists. I think we should now go on to the next one, but we've taken your point. Thank you, René.